The Shadow of the Past. Chapter 1. The Return. Clara had left her hometown, Val-d'Or, 10 years ago to pursue her art studies in Paris. Although the City of Light had welcomed her with open arms, a void remained in her heart. When she received a call from her mother announcing the death of her father, she knew it was time to return. Memories of her childhood and the shadow of her past haunted her, but she realized she had to face this reality. As she returned to Val-d'Or, a light rain fell, adding to the melancholic atmosphere. Crossing the cobbled streets, Clara noticed how nothing had truly changed, yet every corner reminded her of a moment from her childhood. The laughter of children playing in the park, the cries of vendors in the square, all felt both familiar and foreign. Entering her family home, Clara felt a mix of warmth and sadness. The house was filled with memories, but also with the absence of her father. Her mind was occupied by childhood recollections. She remembered the stories her father used to tell her, especially the one about the shadow that, according to him, haunted their village. Chapter 2. The Village Tales. That night, Clara decided to go out to the local cafe. She needed to speak with the townsfolk to understand what had happened during her absence. Upon entering, she was greeted by familiar yet time-worn faces. Rumors about recent events in the village were plentiful, and Clara quickly learned that her father had spent his last years talking about a shadow that roamed at night. This shadow, explained an old friend, Juliet, is a legend in our village. They say it appears to those who have secrets to hide. Your father believed it was real. Clara, though skeptical, could not ignore the anxiety in Juliet's voice. What happened exactly, she asked. Several villagers have disappeared in recent years, whispered Juliet. Your father was convinced they were taken by the shadow. Clara's heart tightened. She didn't know whether to believe these stories, but she felt they were tied to her father's death. She began to reflect on the shadows of her own past, her fears, her regrets. Clara decided she needed to investigate further into these disappearances. Chapter 3. The Discovery. The next morning, she headed to the village library. There she found old archives, newspaper clippings about the mysterious disappearances. Each article mentioned a connection with shadow stories, fears, and secrets. Clara spent hours sifting through these documents, captivated by the tales. Suddenly, she stumbled upon a diary hidden between two books. The pages were yellowed with age, but the writing was still legible. It belonged to a young woman who had disappeared decades ago. In her writings, she spoke of a forbidden love, a secret that had driven her to flee. Clara was entranced. The words of the young woman resonated with her own feelings. She was drawn to the story, but there was also a sense of danger. As she continued reading, she found a mention of a rendezvous in the woods near their village, a place where the shadow was supposed to appear. Chapter 4. The Forest of Secrets. That night, Clara decided to explore the forest. She knew it was risky, but she was determined to uncover the truth about the shadow and the disappearances. Armed with a flashlight, she ventured into the woods, the darkness enveloping her. The trees seemed to whisper, their twisted branches casting strange shadows. Clara felt a presence, but she pressed on, following the path the diary had described. As she delved deeper, the air grew colder and the atmosphere heavier. Then she spotted a figure in the distance. It was a woman dressed in white, standing near an ancient oak tree. Clara hesitated, but something drew her in. She approached slowly. As she got closer, the figure turned to her, revealing a familiar face. It was the young woman from the diary. "Why are you here?" the woman asked, her voice soft yet firm. "You shouldn't be here." "I'm searching for answers," Clara replied, her heart racing. "I want to understand why so many people have disappeared." The woman sighed. "The shadows feed on secrets, Clara. They want to keep us for themselves. Your father knew, but it was too late." Chapter 5. The connection. Clara understood that this woman had been taken by the shadow, but she still had a part of her story to tell. Your father was a good man, but he had his own secrets. The shadow drew him in. What secrets? Clara asked, a mix of fear and anger swelling within her. He hid a love, a promise he made. He thought by keeping it secret, he would protect you, but the shadow knew. It fed on his guilt, his fear. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She realized her father's love had never been far. He had been a man caught between two worlds, between love and fear. What must I do? She asked, desperate. You must break the cycle, face the shadow with the light of truth. You must speak of his secrets, even if they are painful. It's the only way to free yourself and your father. Chapter 6. The Enlightening Truth. The next day, Clara returned to the village, determined to reveal the truth. She called a meeting in the town square, inviting anyone who had lost a loved one. I've discovered truths about our disappearances, she began, her voice trembling. We must speak of our secrets. It's the only way to fight the shadow that haunts us. The villagers exchanged puzzled glances, but Clara continued. She recounted the young woman's story, the secrets each person carried within. Gradually, stories began to emerge. Each account was filled with sorrow and regret, but also with love. The villagers realized they all shared something in common, the fear of revealing their truths. By sharing their stories, they brought light into the darkness. Chapter 7. The Confrontation. That night, Clara and the villagers gathered in the forest, armed with lanterns. Together, they walked towards the ancient oak tree, where the shadow had taken so many souls. Clara stood before them, determined to confront the shadow once and for all. We fear you no longer, she cried into the night. We are united, and we bring the truth into the light. A shadow materialized, darker than the night, twisting and howling. Clara felt her heart race, but she did not falter. She knew the shadow fed on fear, and she would no longer allow it that power. The villagers stood together, their lanterns illuminating the path. Clara stepped forward, carrying the light of the past in her heart. My father did not disappear in shame, she declared. He loved, and it is that love that should be celebrated. At that moment the shadow hesitated, flickering like a flame. Clara felt her father's presence, a feeling of love radiating from her. I free you, father, she whispered. Chapter 8. The Renaissance. With those words, the shadow slowly dissipated, giving way to a bright light. The villagers felt a relief, as if a weight had been lifted. Clara collapsed, exhausted but filled with a sense of peace. The next morning, sunlight poured into the forest, and the village awoke to a new dawn. Clara had found her father, not physically, but in the stories she had shared. She decided to stay in Val-d'Or, to continue painting, to tell stories. She knew that love, even when hidden, is stronger than fear. Every night, she stood beneath the ancient oak, remembering the stories of the villagers and celebrating those she had lost.